she bought a storage unit. The tape inside explains. She bought the storage unit on a wind-pushed Saturday in early October, the kind of day when flags along the frontage roads snapped like polite warnings and the auctioneer's voice carried clean across the lot. The place was called Milepost Storage, just outside Tulsa, Oklahoma, a long row of corrugated doors facing a strip of prairie that kept trying to become a parking lot. She was not a flipper by trade. She was a librarian who liked old paper and lost letters. Her name was Leora Penn, and she raised her hand on a hunch when the auctioneer said the original renter had defaulted contents as is, cash only. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? The year was 2020, that long elastic year that stretched and snapped and stretched again. Leora had a quiet car with a trunk that clicked shut like a punctuation mark. She had a brother named Finch who texted her thrift store photos like fortunes. She had a mother in assisted living who remembered questions but not answers. And now, for $430, she also had Unit B, 17, 6x10 dust inscription on the floor like an abandoned sentence. The auction staff cut the lock. The door went up with a skipped beat rattle. A smell slid out that was not quite mildew and not quite time. The light, sweet rot of cardboard and old leather. Inside, 3 banker's boxes labeled with a hand that pressed too hard. 1 wardrobe box crumpled along one spine. A busted desk lamp with a brass gooseneck shaped like a question about to be asked. A milk crate of records with sleeves that had forgotten how to hold themselves. And on top of everything, as if someone had said it last and with a decision, a small gray cassette player with a built-in speaker and a rectangle of yellow tape across its lid. On the tape, block letters in Sharpie, "Play me first." The wind moved in the alley between the units and made the metal doors talk to each other. Leora crouched in the rectangle of shade, thumb hesitating for the length of one breath, then pressed the play button. At first, there was only hiss, then a rustle that could have been a sleeve or a curtain, then a man's voice testing his own name like a microphone check. "This is Calder March," he said. "If you found this, you probably also found the rest. Please listen to the whole thing before you throw anything away. I am not saving myself here. I am trying to return what does not belong to me." The date is June 23rd, 2003. The place is Driftwood Storage on Route 49 outside Amarillo. I am saying that out loud, so when the tape gets copied and mislabeled, I can still put the world back where it goes. The sound of a chair leg grumbled against concrete. Papers shuffled. A small metronome of tapping began and stopped. The man took a breath that had a weight in it. I fixed pianos for 20 years. Churches. Schools. People with money who thought sound was furniture. In '97, I started keeping a log of every instrument that had a story stuck in it. By story, I mean the thing you hear when the room gets quiet and the wood remembers. Don't roll your eyes. If you have never heard cedar explain itself at midnight, that is not my fault. Leora smiled despite herself. She didn't know why she had nearly laughed. Maybe because the voice was so unembarrassed by its own certainty. She adjusted the little volume wheel, the speaker fuzzed, then settled. "I am recording this in a storage unit for a reason," Calder said. "There is a Baldwin Acrosonic in here with its fallboard down and its keys covered by a towel that used to be jade green. On top of it is a shoebox with the words 'Keep for Jaspers' written in pencil. I took that box from a house that was being cleared in a hurry. I told myself I was keeping it safe. I told myself I'd hand it back when the time was better. That was 8 years ago. The time never got better. It got brighter and louder, and then it got mean, and the box stayed under my bed like a small dog that thinks it has permission. Today, I am putting it where it belongs, which is somewhere a person can choose it or not choose it without me choosing for them." The tape clicked. He continued, "If you are Jaspers, or you loved one, or you know one, please keep what matters and toss the rest. Just know this first. The shoebox contains letters between 2 people who met at night school at Tulsa Community in 1974. Their names were Odell Frost and Evo Jaspers. He was 20 and thought he was already late. She was 24 and tired in a way a person shouldn't be at 24. They wrote like the world was going to let them live wherever they set the words down. The letters stopped just before Christmas, 1976. The reason is not a twist. It is the average tragedy. She got sick and then sicker. He did not know how to write to a sickness that took her mouth away. The last letter is his to her. He mailed it 3 days after the funeral. The envelope came back rubber-stamped, forwarding order expired. It sat in a house for 2 decades until I was tuning the family's Kimball, and they told me to set aside anything sentimental for the dumpster. And you see, I have a dumb belief that paper should be read before it is burned. A gust pushed gravel down the row like a handful of beads. Leora paused the tape and looked into her unit, as if the boxes could confirm this story. She set the player on the wardrobe box and lifted the top of the nearest banker's box. Receipts. Polaroids with the color cooled to a vintage sadness. A folded travel map with lines drawn like veins between Amarillo and Tulsa. The milk crate of records gave up a Carole King sleeve, rumors with a coffee ring, a gospel record from a church in Sepulpa. The cassette player droned a faint motor whine as if it were eager to continue. She pressed play. Ivo, Calder said, shifting into the second person, like someone who has been telling a story too long to keep pretending he isn't inside it. If you're listening, I kept something that was not mine because I thought the world would eat it. I am an idiot in exactly that way. I am also your accomplice now if you want me. In the bottom of the box, you'll find a tape that isn't this one. It is labeled December 27th, and you can guess the year. It is her, Odell. The last night, she felt up to getting her voice into a machine. She didn't tell you because she didn't think the machine could hold the shape she wanted to say to your face. I don't think machines can hold shapes either, but sometimes they keep the outline well enough that a person can fill it in. If you would rather not hear it, don't. Burn it and say a kind word and go make a sandwich. If you would, then sit and be ready to forgive yourself after. Whatever you do, don't listen driving. Ask me how I know. Leora's hands moved before her mind did. She slid the wardrobe box aside and hauled the banker's boxes out into the light. The tape ran. Calder cleared his throat once, then offered one last breadcrumb. I am going to leave this unit with rent paid for 6 months. I'm leaving the desk lamp that looks like it belonged to someone who wanted to read long after the room gave up. I am leaving the Baldwin cupboard, which is disrespectful to instruments and necessary for dust. If you are not Ivo or Kin and you opened this and felt a tug, maybe you are the kind of person who opens doors in museums you're not supposed to open. I can't stop you. But if you take the tape, take the box too. Stories get lonely if you split them. All right, that is me done. I'm going to label this Play Me First and lock up. I will drive to a diner where the coffee tastes like someone loved it an hour ago, and I will not look back. Good night. The tape wheezed to a stop and stayed there with its little spools paused, like eyes that had decided to blink and stuck. Leora ejected it. The cassette was the cheap clear kind with gray hubs, a bite taken out of one corner like a mark from a nervous jaw. She set it aside carefully and went to work on the shoebox in the bottom of the second banker's box. There it was, the penciled Keep for Jaspers, in a hand that had tried to write neatly when it wanted to run. The lid resisted at first with that dry hiss cardboard makes when it has sealed to itself. She slid a fingernail under and lifted. On top, letters in a stack, rubber band fossilized to a brittle loop, and then snapped quietly when her thumb found it. Dates in the corners. 1974 in April. 1975 with summer still in the stamp. A ticket stub to a cinema that no longer existed. A brochure for night classes with prices that looked like jokes now. And at the bottom, as promised, a cassette slid against the rough cardboard and knocked once. Leora lifted it out. The label was crooked. December 27th, the year written very small. 1976. Her hands were not shaking, but they were listening. Her car's dash still had a tape deck because she had refused to trade it in for a newer something that didn't have teeth for music. She almost walked to the car. Then she stopped because a voice in her head sounded suspiciously like Calder's caution about driving and hearing a thing that bent your understanding of what sound can hold. She looked around for an outlet. The storage office would have one, but the manager had retreated with his clipboard and his coffee to the room with the little TV. Leora picked up the cassette player. A miracle. It had batteries. She grinned at an object in 2020 that ran on forgiveness and double A's. She set the old player on her trunk, fed the tape in with a care the machine rewarded by accepting it smoothly, and pressed play. Hiss, the slow wind of old magnetism waking. A distant clink like a glass set on tile. Then a woman's voice that arrived the way snowfall sometimes arrives in a drought, soft first, then unapologetic. Evo Jaspers, she said, you told me never to record because I try to edit my life when there is a red light. I am ignoring you because not everything we decide together should stay decided. It is the 27th. Christmas is done with me. I am done with it. I wore the scarf you bought, even though it makes me look like a librarian from a story where the librarian unbuttons her blouse at the end and chooses a wild life. Stupid scarf, perfect scarf, I loved it. I am sitting at the kitchen table, and I can hear the refrigerator think. You always say refrigerators think too much, and look how the milk tastes of thinking. The voice was not shaky. It had the kind of steadiness that is not bravado, but a gift a person gives to the people listening. Odell breathed in as if drawing a line she wished were longer. I am not going to make it to spring, she said in the tone of someone admitting they are not going to make it to a movie on time. Nothing tragic in my voice, love. I am trying to keep the tragedy in my hands on this table. I want to put them down gently so they do not wake anyone. I am not afraid. That is not bravery. The body is tired, like a clock, that has been asked to keep time for a dance that went one song too long. What I am is greedy. I want more of you. I want to watch you learn how you stand when there is a child at your hip and a skillet on the stove and a song in your head. I want to hear your temper forgive your mouth. I want to finish organizing the Broken Spine novels at the bookstore, even though we both know I only work there to borrow sentences and put them back. But a person doesn't get to want and get in the same breath. Leora leaned against the car and closed her eyes for a count that surprised her with its length. The lot around her had its own noise, the rattle of a chain on a flagpole, a truck lugging in second, a crow that had lost its patience with something on the fence, but the voice made those sounds pat themselves on the head and promised to be quiet. You asked me once what I wanted you to do if I left first, Odell went on. I said remarry and be happy, because that is what you are supposed to say if you do not want to be accused of clutching. I have a different answer now, and I am allowed to revise because I am still here with breath in my pocket. I want you to put a box in a place where a stranger could find it, with instructions that say, take what you need. Not because I think romance belongs in thrift shops, but because the world seems to pass its tenderness along that way. We pay attention to what we do not expect to find. We pick up what someone else set down and we think, oh, I get to decide two lives right now, mine and theirs. It makes us more careful with both. She laughed, that short, violent laugh people make when they almost cry and disagree with their face about it. If you find this after I am gone, congratulations on your snooping. You love me enough to live in my kitchen after my kitchen belongs to dust. You love me enough to put your ear to a machine when it would be easier to put your head in a pillow. I will not say do not be sad. Be as sad as you please. Be ridiculous with it for a while. Wear your sadness out like shoes on a long walk, and then when they have holes in them, throw them away and go barefoot for a month. But promise me you will buy new shoes when the weather turns. Promise me you will keep a stove fuel canister in your car because someday you will offer it to a stranger at a trailhead, and this will be the way the world returns. Something I am stealing right now by leaving. The tape made a small, warbly sound as the tension shifted, then continued. Listen to me bossing you around, Odell said, fond exasperation in the syllables. I am going to put this tape in a box with letters you never saw. You called me a magpie when we met, and look, all I have collected are words and ticket stubs. The letters are mostly me, because you hated writing on paper that did not have music staves, and you did not think words would stay put if they could not sit on bars. The last letter is yours. You wrote it inside your head, and will write it later with a pen. The pen will do its best, the paper will do its best. Here is the part I cannot make neat. I want you to leave the box somewhere you do not own. A storage unit, a church basement, the free shelf in the back of the bookshop. Somewhere a person has to choose to look twice. She paused, and the tape sighed with her. The thing you always say about pianos is in my head, she murmured. That They carry the memory of every hand that asked them to be more than wood. I don't know what I am asking you to be. More than wood, less than a shrine, something that can be picked up and put down without breaking. You are good at that. Your hands know how to pass a thing. The end of the tape came with a soft click, like a door catching. Silence fell with dignity. Leora stood in the concrete wind, the cassette player ticking to itself, and realized she had been holding her breath in a way that made her chest feel like a drawer that didn't want to open. She exhaled and felt the world get its shape back around her. The storage yard's manager had wandered out to smoke and had stopped in the doorway, watching her kindly from behind his own weather. He raised his chin in that American way that means, "Do you need another person, or should I go pretend not to see you?" She shook her head and put her palm on the trunk as if the metal could read it. The letters in the shoebox were not neat. They were fierce. They were church and break room and bus stop and laundromat. They were written on grocery lists and margins of community college handouts and the backs of band flyers. They smelled like every hand that had held them, plus cedar dust and a sweetness that might have been someone's perfume from a life that had learned to be generous with its molecules. Leora read the first one, standing there in the wind, and then had the sense to stop. Some reading needs a table, a glass of water, and a chair that learned patience. She loaded the car with a librarian's Tetris, slid the cassette player into the passenger footwell where others might put a tiny dog, paid the auction manager who counted cash with a resigned gratitude, and drove to the house where nobody waited for her, the kind of vacancy that makes room for new things and also makes the old ones echo. Night arrived in the square way it arrives in October on the plains. Leora made tea and wrapped her mother's Afghan around herself in a way that would have made her mother tut with approval. She set the shoebox on the kitchen table and arranged the tapes and letters like she was about to catalog them and would not be punished if she took her time. She allowed herself 3 letters, then the rest tomorrow. It became 4, then 5, then midnight, then 1 in the morning with the lamp glass warm and the tea cold. Odell wrote like a sparrow sings, plain and suddenly cruel with truth. I have not learned how to trust a day that stays good, she wrote in early summer. And then, in late autumn, I am practicing believing you when you say soup counts as dinner. She wrote about the bookstore where old men argued kindly about baseball and pretended to forget to leave so they could be told to stay. She wrote about the night school classroom that smelled like pencils and tired. She wrote about a piano in a church basement with 2 keys that hung back like shy children, and the way Ivo tuned them like he was begging the room to promise to be itself. Ivo appears in the margins of the letters. The way the person a letter is written to appears without ever entering the room. He is funny the way people are funny when they are not trying. He is a fixer of everything except his own habit of leaving tools where he used them last. He wants a straight answer from the future and refuses to ask the question politely. He plays blues in E and refuses to apologize. He brings home oranges when money says no because the taste of an orange is the opposite of a mistake. The last letter was his, and Leora saved it for the last. Don't make it tidy, she told herself, and read it anyway with a kind of fear that felt like jumping into water she already knew was cold. Odell, he wrote, the loop of his J from her surname cutting clean across the top line. Today, the mailbox understood time better than I did. It gave me back the envelope I had paid to send. I am grateful to a thing that has no mouth. I am writing this in the room where you laughed at me for liking a rug with so many flowers it looked like the rug was trying too hard. The rug is trying less hard without you. Everything is. I put your scarf on the back of the chair you always refused to let the cat sleep on, and the cat sat there for an hour, mad as a relative. I do not know how to be a person. Yesterday I did, and I expected to today, and look, I will try again tomorrow, because you made me promise to be stupid with trying. I am putting a shoebox where the world can trip over it. If a stranger finds it, I hope they are the kind who is brave enough to open things that are not theirs and gentle enough to put them back. I hope they write to tell me so I can stop pretending the box is a secret and call it what it is, a return. He had signed only Ivo and then, smaller, forgive me for not getting there in time for the last joke you told that wasn't funny. I would have laughed if you had asked me to, but I am glad you didn't ask me to. Leora slept in the chair with the Afghan around her shoulders and the tape player on the table like a small guardian that had learned to keep watch without being asked. Morning came with a plainness that felt like a blessing. She woke, poured new tea, and wrote on a note card with firm letters that made the pen behave. To anyone named Jaspers connected to Odell Frost. Please call. Then she paused, took a breath, and replaced the word call with write. She did not know why until later, when the answer came folded in an envelope that smelled like someone's drawer. She found Ivo in the only way some people can be found now, by a trail of mentions that led to an obituary that did not brag. He had died in 2011 in a house where the cat had once slept on a chair. The obituary had the names of a sister and her two sons, a line about the instruments he had tuned for churches that might not have known what generosity costs, and a sentence that made Leora grip the paper. Survived also by the music he never got to write and the people who played what he fixed. The sister lived in Ponca City then. A search produced a different address in Bartlesville now. Leora wrote the note card anew and set it under a magnet on her refrigerator to stare back at her while she did dishes and decided if it was her place. 2 days later, she mailed a letter with the caution and audacity of a person who has to cross a room to hand a stranger back their own past. She included a copy of Calder's label in the corner because she wanted to prove that intention can be inherited. She waited. Waiting learned her name and sat down in her kitchen with its patient lamp. In a week and 2 days, an envelope arrived with a stamp that had been placed on at a slight angle, the way a person with a careful hand becomes human at the last second. The return address said Jaspers, and Leora sat down on the rug and read with her back against the pantry door. Dear Miss Penn, it began in a slanted script. My name is Anza Jaspers. I am Ivo's niece. I do not know how you got my address, but if you did it politely, I will thank you instead of yell. My uncle used to say, if you make a thing and put it in the world, you do not get to decide how it travels. I am relieved he is right. I know about Odell because I am named after her. He told my sister and me her story when we turned 12 so we would not confuse romance with rescue, and he told it again when we turned 20 so we would not confuse grief with identity. He had a box. We never saw inside it. He kept it under his bed like a grudging god. When he got sick, he told me there was a man named Calder who once did a kindness and a theft at the same time, and that someday the box might return the slow way. If it came, he wanted me to write back to the person who carried it, so I am writing. Tell me what you have. Tell me what you want me to do. If this is a joke, I will forgive you, because it would not be a funny one. Leora wrote back with copies of the first pages, careful not to let her own hunger make her rude. She offered to drive. Anza wrote back the next day with a time and a pot roast menu, as if there were no other way to do this than to feed someone. The drive to Bartlesville took the length of an album and a half, which is not how a librarian measures time, but this time it was. The clouds lay low and thin like a sheet pulled over a lamp. Leora parked in front of a house with white trim that looked like it had been painted by a person who knows how to steady a brush by leaning against the ladder. The door opened before Leora knocked. A woman in her 40s stood with her hands already out, not for an embrace, but for a receipt that weighed more than the shoebox. Behind her, a man waved from the kitchen. The smell of onions and thyme made everything gentler. Anza was the kind of person whose face tells you 50 stories before her mouth says one. She took the box and set it on the table and did not open it for a full minute. Then she did. Her mouth moved, a little, not because she was trying to speak, but because a person's lips sometimes learn to read when their eyes cannot keep up. They listened to the tape at the table with hands flat on the wood, not because anyone asked them to, but because it felt like a way to offer stillness to Odell's voice. When the part came about being ridiculous with sadness and wearing it out like shoes, Anza laughed the small laugh of a person who recognizes the flavor of the advice. He said that, she murmured. He said it like he was inventing the metaphor in front of us, and I have a tape of the original. The room held that sentence like it was catching something fragile. They ate pot roast with pieces of potato that had learned the taste of everything else in the pan. They drank coffee that was new enough to forgive any conversation. They opened the box and took out letters with their hands, like museum workers without gloves. They spoke names like they were calibrating a piano, tuning each syllable until it answered back. That night, Leora drove home under a sky that pretended to be empty and was not. She left the radio off so the car could hear what the night was doing. She slept and dreamed of a storage unit that kept changing its door color, and every door she opened was a different past returning itself. She woke with the taste of dust in her mouth and did not mind. In the weeks that followed, the box lived a second life in a house that understood how to host it. Anza read a letter a day out loud at the table with the window cracked and the dog asleep under her feet. She wrote Leora small updates. Today I learned how Odell laughed at my uncle's fear of oranges. Today I learned that night school used to smell like chalk and resolve. Today I learned that a person can fit a year inside a paragraph and still find room for the weather. Calder's name became a project. They wanted to thank him and did not know how to find his breath in the web. Leora tried phone directories from Amarillo with her librarian stubbornness. She found 3 Calder marches that were not him and one who had moved 2 years prior with no forwarding address. She found a piano tuner's business listing with a disconnected number. She turned to a stack of clippings and found, in a small column with a blurry photo, a mention of a memorial for a Calder M in a church that had bad lighting and kind carpet. The date was 2007. The photo showed a pair of hands holding a felt strip and a tuning hammer. The caption did not brag. A life, it suggested, that had done work and left the room better. Anza wrote a letter anyway. She wrote it as if it were going to be read out loud to a person who could not afford to be bothered unless the bother was beautiful. She mailed it to the church. She mailed one to the storage facility in Amarillo in case anyone there had inherited the story. She put one in a book at the free library on her block, tucked into a copy of a novel nobody seems to want when they need it and everybody wants when they have room. She addressed one to no one, put no stamp on it, and tucked it in the shoebox under the letters. In December, Snow performed its first attempt, failed, and tried again with a more persuasive voice. Leora went to visit her mother, who held her hand, and asked her what year it was, with a tone that admitted timelines are slippery now. Leora said it aloud, 2020, and then, when her mother smiled at the neatness of the numbers, Leora added, "It is also Tuesday afternoon and you like soup." Her mother nodded, satisfied by specifics. Leora read to her from one of Odell's letters. Her mother, who had always loved women who refused not to be clever, laughed once and said, "Tell her to write more." "I'll tell her," Leora said, and did not correct the tense. On the last day of the year, a small package arrived on Leora's porch in weather that could not decide whether to rain. It was wrapped in brown paper with string, old-fashioned on purpose and not by necessity. The return address was a music shop in Amarillo that smelled when she opened the door of rosin and hope. Inside the box, a cassette labeled in a different hand. It said simply, "Driftwood." Then, a date in 2003. A note was tucked in. "You do not know me," it read. "I run the counter at the place where Calder used to buy strings cheap and swear under his breath that the new strings had no patience. We found this in a drawer where the receipts go to forget their names. He left it here the week the storage unit auctioned off his things. He told me to hold it for a person who would ask nicely. No one did. Maybe you are that person." She put the tape into the player with a care that made the table hear it. The hiss began like a tide. Calder's voice arrived. Older or tired, she couldn't tell. He spoke as if he had skipped the first parts he usually said because he felt he owed a different kind of sentence. If this is Leora, or Anza, or someone else kind who made room for a box to travel, listen. I wanted to write a clever instruction for how to put things back. I do not have one. The closest I have is this. When you find a story mid-sentence, do not add your name to the end like a signature. Put your name small in the margin as a witness. Then hand the page to the person whose life it is and let them choose their own pen. He laughed softly, like a man who had decided to stop scolding himself and was enjoying the quiet. The Baldwin in Unit B17 has a hairline crack in the bridge that will not keep it from speaking if someone loves it anyway. Pianos are like that. People are like that. You will think you have to fix the crack to deserve the music. You do not. You will think the crack is the point. It is not. The point is that the thing still says what it came to say. The tape ended without drama. Leora sat in her kitchen with the shoebox open and the lights soft and the winter outside, pretending it would not ask for more heat. She took out Odell's last tape and listened again, not to study, but to keep a promise to let a voice use the room. She held the letters that had traveled across years, and storage fees and dust and a man's guilt. She smiled down a hallway of time toward a piano she would never see. In February, Anza sent a photo. It was the Baldwin, its towel folded and placed properly, its fallboard up, a vase of eucalyptus on the far end because some leaves talk quieter and longer than flowers. The caption said, "It holds tune better than it should." Anto would have called that grace. The next photo was a child's hand, Anza's daughter, pressing middle C like a doorbell. The next, a dog asleep under the bench. Spring learned its way up from the soil. Leora took the empty cardboard from her unit to the paper recycling, and the man there told her his mother had kept a box of napkins with love notes on them that the family found when the house had to forget them. People put thoughts anywhere, he said, and laughed a little as if proud of humanity's mess. She kept the cassette player. She kept the first tape that said, "Play me first," and the second that said December 27th because some objects become addresses. She kept a copy of one letter that had a sentence she recited on days when the library had more books than hands and more requests than hours. The sentence was Odell's, and it said, "I do not write to be wise. I write to leave a door open in case someone needed that exact door today." On a June morning, with thunder stacked like books no one had time to read, Leora pulled into milepost storage for the last time. She slid her unit door up, empty, except for the desk lamp that curved its brass neck, and asked if she was sure. She plugged it in and turned it on, and the light made a small pool on the concrete like a confession. She left it on for a minute because objects appreciate ceremony even when they pretend not to. Then she turned it off, marked the unit clean on the clipboard with a pen attached by a chain, and dropped the key into a mouth that had swallowed thousands before. On the drive home, she passed a church sign that had not changed its advice since she was small. Be kind. Everyone is fighting a hard battle. She would have rolled her eyes at 12. She nodded at 40. At a stoplight, a man held a cardboard square with letters that tried to be neat. "Need help," it said, and then smaller. "Not a bad man, just a broke one." She handed him the rest of her change and a bottle of water she had known would be asked of her eventually. His thank you had the shape of a person accustomed to sudden doors. Years later, when her mother's memory folded itself like a map and slipped into a drawer that did not belong to any room, Leora took the box of letters to the assisted living and read them aloud on Tuesdays. Not all of them. Some are private and stayed private. Enough that a circle of women who had once been harsher with themselves than they deserved sat a little easier in their chairs and made the kinds of noises women make when a sentence lands where the body keeps its truest things. One afternoon, a woman who seldom spoke said softly, "Put a box in a place where a stranger could find it," and then laughed like a girl about to run. If you are listening to this story, there is probably a door near you. A cupboard, a glove compartment, a drawer that has learned patience by becoming cluttered. Somewhere in your town, there is a shelf where someone has left what they could not keep, and someone else will take what they did not know they needed. If you have a tape player, wind a tape with your finger and feel the old physics still answer. If you only have your voice, use it in a room at 2 in the morning and see if the wood answers. If you have a box, consider putting it where a stranger could find it. Write on the lid in pencil so the world knows it can edit. There was no twist here. No ghost in the unit except the ordinary one that lives in paper and insists on teaching us how to carry each other a little farther down the hall. The man who took what was not his did not profit. He apologized. The woman who wrote did not survive long enough to call it a memoir. She survived long enough to call it a door. The man who loved her grew old and kept tune. The people who came after learned the shape of falling in love with strangers and the more difficult shape of giving the thing back. And so, if it is late where you are and the house has stopped making its usual noises, Pour water into a glass and notice the sound it makes when it hits the bottom, hollow turning to full. Think of a box under a bed. Think of a storage unit with a label you can't resist. Think of a piano with a hairline crack that still sings like itself. Think of a sentence in a letter that arrives in a year you needed it, from a person who never knew your name and said it anyway by accident. Then stand, walk to whatever door you have, and leave it open for one slow, careful minute, just long enough for someone who needs exactly that door today to find their way through. The call came in on a Tuesday at 4:32 in the afternoon, late October. The sun already sliding behind the Blue Ridge, so the hollows of Shenandoah darkened early. Ranger Aislinn Keats was parked at mile marker 47 of Skyline Drive, just north of the Rapidan turnoff, a paper cup of station coffee cooling in the cup holder, and her radio tuned to the quiet channel they used for backcountry check-ins. The speaker breathed. Static arranged itself into a voice that did not sound like any of her crew. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Aislinn turned the volume wheel a notch. Out the windshield, the ridge was drawn in crosshatch, oaks and hickories going copper, the sky a pale thing you could scratch with your nail. The voice came again, precise, as if it were reading off a card. Fox Hollow Base to any unit on the east slope. Child missing, male, age 8, name Harlan Whitcomb, last seen near the Old Stone Spring House above Corbin Run, weather degenerating, Hurricane Hazel expected to push in, winds rising, request all available, time is 16:30, October 14, 1954. The radio clicked off into snow. Then, faintly, the same message, identical down to the breath before the name. Aislinn stared at the handset. Their base was called Piney River Dispatch. Their tower names were Pinnacles and Hazeltop and Big Meadows. No one in the park had used Fox Hollow for decades. Her training cracked its knuckles. She keyed the mic. Piney River to unknown unit. Say again. Who is calling Fox Hollow Base? Silence laid itself over the car like a thin blanket. Beyond the glass, a crow moved from one bear snag to another as if demonstrating a diagram. The wind was a steady push from the southeast. Hazel. The word gave the hairs on Aislinn's arms ideas. She stepped out and let the door swing shut. The air had that warm edge you get before a storm that started somewhere else. Leaves chased each other along the asphalt, then lay down. In the trunk lay her day pack, a spare radio, and a copy of a paper map creased along the places everyone folds them. She slung the pack, checked battery levels, turned the spare to scan. The main radio kept its sulk. The spare found chatter from Big Meadows about a flat tire near Lewis Mountain, then returned to quiet. The old voice did not return. Aislinn keyed in to dispatch. Piney, Keats at 47. I caught a transmission, sounds like a vintage call. Reference to Fox Hollow, child missing near Corbin Run, date October 14, 1954. Could someone check the archive on that, see if we have a historical incident report? The dispatcher was a steady woman named Karen, who did not make noises she did not need. Copy, Aislinn. Stand by. Aislinn leaned on the hood and looked east, where the hills tumbled like knuckles, all green and copper and shadow. She had worked Shenandoah 5 seasons. She knew the way the ridges spoke when you asked them right. She also knew radios lie sometimes, bouncing off ducts of temperature and skipping across layers of ionized air like stones. She had heard voices from fire towers that had been torn down before she was born, and a farmer yelling to his brother on a frequency no longer assigned to anyone. She had never heard a date pinned to a hurricane whose name lived in the county's memory like a scar. Karen came back. We have a typewritten Keats, Incident 1954-H, filed at Piney River. Hurricane Hazel, multiple rock slides, a missing person in the Corbin area, that name you gave. It is a cold file. It does not say recovered. I repeat, not recovered. No remains located. Not closed. Aislinn pressed the radio to her shoulder until the plastic complained. Copy. Can you send scans to my phone? I'm heading down to the Corbin Run access. If anyone else is close enough to meet, let them know. There was a pause, a little breath that was not static. Karen's voice softened a shade, the way people do when the past finds a way to ask for your time. Sending now. Watch your footing. The trails are a mess of marbles with the leaves down. Want Dupre from Hazeltop on standby. Affirmative. Aislinn slung the pack across her back and looked once more at the ridgeline. A truck from Fleet rumbled past, the driver lifting 2 fingers off the wheel in that rural benediction. Clouds had started as a rumor and were now themselves. The Corbin Run access was a gravel pull-off hidden beneath tulip poplars that had learned to whisper. Aislinn eased the truck in sideways and cut the engine. She took the trail with her boots, making small promises to each rock. The stream voiced itself down the hollow knit of last week's rain and this afternoon's melt of a single stubborn snowpatch in a shadow under a ledge. The map told the story of the lower springhouse, a square of stones where water had been convinced to behave. Above it, a ledge with a scatter of quartz chips, the leftovers of older hands doing older work. Aislinn kept an ear on her radio and the other on the creek. She caught the place where a trail forgets itself and becomes deer. She found the old springhouse, its stones, asking to be counted. She touched the edge of the low wall with the kind of gentleness reserved for quilts and engines. She did not say the boy's name. The afternoon pulled its shoulders in. The radio breathed again. Same cadence, same careful voice. Fox Hollow base to any unit on the east slope. Child missing. Harlan Whitcomb. Last seen near Stone Spring House above Corbin Run. Weather degenerating. Request all available. Time is 16:30. October 14, 1954. Aislinn shivered in the warm air. Her eyes went to the spring house and its square of shadow. She moved the beam of her headlamp across the stones, not because she expected to see anything, but because light can sometimes rewrite a sentence the land is trying to say. The beam found a length of rust, half buried in the moss, along the back of the foundation, thin as a butter knife, with a clip and a circle at one end. She crouched. A whistle. Army surplus, by the look of it. She teased it free, the moss unwilling to let it go. The metal had pitted and softened into a river-colored thing. She wiped it once against her sleeve, then regretted the act. Her radio clicked and made a sound she had not heard in years, a squelch from another era. Karen came back on. Keats. Dupre is on the way from Hazeltop Tower, 20 minutes if the drive is kind. Archives show the boy was last seen by his father near the spring house, yes. The father left him to fetch his jacket from the car. Weather shifted, heavy gust pushed through, child gone when he returned. Tracks lost near the ledge above the run. 2 days of cruise, then Hazel brought the flood and they stood them down. The file has letters from the mother, 2 years after, asking if anyone found anything she could hold. Answer stamped no. Aislinn looked at the whistle in her hand, then at the spring that fed the run. The water wore a sheen of leaves thin enough to count. She keyed the mic. Found a whistle near the spring house. Will bag it. Doubt it has any forensic value after 6 decades, but a photograph might matter to someone. As she spoke, a figure eased out of the trees upstream. A man in the brown and green of a ranger uniform, but the cut of it was wrong in a way you can feel even if you do not have the words. The shirt had pockets like ideas, the hat sat stiff as a rule book, he carried a strap radio that looked like a lunch pail with an antenna. He exhaled, then stopped when he saw her. "Ma'am," he said. There was a formality in the syllables, like church on a day that hurt. "We're sweeping the east slope." The boy's father said he was right here. He pointed at the stones, as if pointing could anchor the earth. Aislinn stood very still. The man's face had the smoothness of someone who had not yet had reason to learn what whiskey was for. His name tag said M. Elwood. His shoulder patch bore an American shield with a tree she did not recognize. He glanced down at her radio and then at the whistle in her hand. "You with us?" he asked. "You with Fox Hollow?" Aislinn's throat did the dry swallow of a person whose mind is faster than her words. "Yes," she said, because yes was easier than telling a man with a lunch pail radio about the word digital. "I heard your call." "Where are your lines?" "At the ridge," he said, puzzled by the question. "We got men cutting sign along the deer trails. We got women at base keeping track of names. The disaster man out of Charlottesville told us Hazel will give us until dawn and then gone. He looked past her to the ledge, his jaw a small square against the warm air. Mother is at the church in Syria, not the far one, the one with the bell rope that sticks. She keeps asking if he had a jacket. She wants the question to be a fact. A gust moved through the trees on some business of its own. Aislinn felt the air change around the bones of the rocks. The man looked at her again, and the little muscle at the corner of his mouth twitched. "Your radio?" he said. "You get this out to anyone else." "Yes." "We have a tower at Hazeltop. They know. Someone is coming." "Good," he said softly. Then he put 2 fingers to his brow, an old salute done halfway because distance is difficult to respect when the ground is asking for more of you. He stepped past her, boots exact on the damp leaves, and moved toward the ledge, listening with his face. He put a hand out as if to feel a draft. His outline lightened as if the warm air had decided he belonged to it. The forest made the sound of a coat hem brushed along a pew. He was gone. Aislinn stood, her hands empty now that the whistle had weight inside a bag. She did not call after him because naming a thing makes it pick a room and leave all the others. She climbed the slope above the spring house, careful, testing each foot. The ground showed her where it had let go before. The soil had slumped sometime between 1954 and now a scar that trees had tried to stitch. She scoped along the edge and thought about the father leaving for a jacket, a boy with a whistle and a spring that talks even when wind tells it not to. Dupre's SUV nosed into the pull-off as the last of the light left, and the storm made its speech. Jericho Dupre had shoulders like a doorframe and a way of stepping onto ground as if asking permission. He carried 2 headlamps and a calm that turned wind into a task rather than a threat. "You heard it too," he said, by way of greeting. "I did, twice. Then it came again down at the spring house. I found this." She held up the bag. The whistle swung on its string, dull as an old firmament. He took the bag and looked as if it could tell him how to think. He listened. The wind pushed down the hollow. The radio hissed, then thought better of it. He nodded at the ledge. "If it were mine to write," he said, "I would say, slip. The file says gusty before hazel. A child with a small sense of infinity walks the line twice to see if the sound changes along the water. It does. He steps where the deer stepped, and the hill remembers it owes the river a favor." Aislinn told him about the ranger with the lunch pail radio. Jericho had been in the park long enough to have a story for everything and to respect none of them fully. Fox Hollow was an unofficial name for the old maintenance yard near Syria in the 50s. He said, the way a person does when they are agreeing with the possibility of a ghost to be polite. There is a cinder pad there with the marks of 4 posts, like a tower. The radios would have been handsets the size of a Bible that could make clouds sound like news. People back then wrote reports thick with nouns. They did not trust adjectives unless a man had bled. He held the bag with the whistle for an extra breath. He set it in his crew pocket. They searched until rain made the ground decide to be a different kind of ground. In light from their headlamps, the trees stood at attention, counseling caution. They ran a short line grid above the ledge, more to be able to say they had used the dark well than because they expected the earth to give up a long-ago truth for free. At 9, the radios called them home before the lightning made the argument personal. Karen met Aislinn at the office with a printout. The file had been scanned, crooked, and the edges were black, where the copier had tried to keep history from fraying. The incident commander's name was printed in a firm hand, M. Elwood. A note in the margin had been added later in pencil. Mother moved to Luray in 67, father deceased, no closure letter sent. The pencil note was signed with a small initial A and a dot. Aislinn slept at the bunkhouse with the radio on her nightstand like a dog. She dreamed that paper flapped along a clothesline strung between trees, and she walked the line, reading every letter, her feet lined up on the rocks of the run, the paper turning to leaves as she read. At 3 in the morning, she woke to the noise a storm makes when it finally accepts its job. The world beyond the window went white, then black, then white again. She turned the volume down to half. She watched the rain write gloss on the sill. The radio stayed quiet. At 10, the day pulled itself together into rags. Aislinn drove down to Luray to a blue house where the porch had a swing, and the swing had two cushions that had learned how to be rain. She had a name from the file and a phone number that still worked, to her surprise. A woman in her 80s opened the door with the careful welcome reserved for officials who might be good news or could be kind even if they were not. "I am Aislinn Keats," she said, ranger with Shenandoah. "I am here because a storm pulled a thread and we saw where it ran." The woman corrected her posture and straightened the collar of her cardigan as if a story would take her picture. "My name is Tilda Whitcomb," she said. "We did not know how to leave him there, so we stayed. I have a loaf of banana bread that forgot the raisins on purpose if you are the kind of visitor who does not mind crumbs." Aislinn sat at a round table so clean it looked like a rule. The banana bread was honest, the tea was strong. Tilda put her hand on the tablecloth and kept it there as if the cloth would be steadier if it knew she was not going anywhere. She said the name Harlan like a stake you drive into ground so the tent knows where to stand. "He whistled 3 notes, Tilda said. "The tune the train plays when it comes into Luray, because his father used to take him to the crossing, and they would wave at the men who stand like saints. 3 notes, and then he would laugh, because he was practiced at laughing. The wind took the notes and did not give them back. My husband ran to the car, and the sky changed. They told him on the radio he had until morning. You can live your whole life in a sentence like that." Aislinn put the bagged whistle on the table. The string looped like a sleeping thing. Tilda did not reach for it. She looked at it as one looks at an old photograph that has learned how to move. "I did not get a letter," she said, and smiled small to prove she was not accusing. "I understand how papers behave. I was a clerk before my hands forgot to love the carbon paper. I suppose I wrote a letter in my head every day for 2 years. Then I stopped asking out loud. You cannot keep asking the same question without turning into a different person." The whistle sat, silent, older than most of the kitchen. Tilda looked out the window, and the window looked back. A red cardinal landed on the feeder and told everyone, rudely, that it had arrived. Tilda laughed at the bird, and the laugh made her look like a photograph of herself. Aislinn asked about the ranger named Elwood. Tilda's eyes softened. "Martin Elwood went to our church," she said. "He was the kind of man who knocked on the door with his hat in both hands. He brought us a bag of oranges at Christmas and apologized as if the oranges had failed to be children. He wrote the report because that is what he could do, and he built a cinder block box for the tower that was not a tower, and then he got quiet like men do when they find out the world can keep a thing from them and they still have to go to work." Back in the truck, Aislinn let the radio hum. Big Meadows asked Pinnacles to send a set of cones to mile marker 62. A bear stared down a minivan with an intensity that made the parents breathe like swimmers. Life had resumed its insistence. She turned the truck toward the old maintenance yard near Syria, the one Jericho half remembered as a place with 4 posts and a name more rumor than rule. There was a cinder pad there for sure, now half invaded by chickweed and ambition. Someone had collected beer cans along the edge and arranged them by brand into a timeline. Aislinn walked the perimeter and crouched at a corner where the concrete had spalled enough to show a rebar smile. She brushed the dirt aside with one hand. A penny lay there. The year was 1954. She laughed, because a park and a story will sometimes give you too many symbols and you have to choose which to be corny about. The wind rose toward evening. The radio stayed in this decade, obedient and dull. Aislinn drove the ridge road, watching the color slide toward Bruce. Back at the office, Karen handed her a thin envelope with a stamped return address that made Aislinn's scalp feel like it had learned something. It was from an amateur radio club in Harrisonburg, a man who had heard the show Aislinn, sometimes called During Slow Nights, the one where listeners told stories of radios hearing the wrong things on purpose. "We pick up oddities when the weather steeps the air," the man had written. "Old distress calls, ham tests bounced off airplane wings, bombers from the 40s practicing. Once, a train dispatch from 1960 rolled through on a rain so thick you could chew it. There are names for this, and none of them explain it. The way I think of it is this: time breathes shallow near storms. If a voice was loud enough once and the same air returns, you might hear a ghost that is not a ghost. Not dead, not alive, just not finished talking. That night, Aislinn drove down to Corbin Run one last time with a single job. She stood by the spring house and held the whistle. She did not put it to her lips because it belonged to a mouth that had done its work. She set it on the stone in the square of water smell and said a sentence Tilda had given her permission to say. Harlan, your mother sits with a red bird and forgives the form and the weather. We leave you where you are, not lost now. We know the place that held you. We will name it, even if the stone refuses to. Thunder argued with a ridge to the west. Aislinn picked up the whistle, tucked it back into the bag, and snapped the bag shut the way you close a letter you cannot ignore any longer. Her radio breathed and then found words. Fox Hollow Base to any unit on the east slope. Search secured. Weather has moved us. We will resume when it lets us. Families headed to shelter. If anyone finds a whistle, mark the spot. End of report, October 14, 1954. Aislinn lifted the handset to her mouth and did not speak. The silence she chose felt like respect, not fear. She held the radio until the voice faded into the music of rain. Then she climbed the hill back to the truck. The park wrote its own ending. Winter stripped the ridge to bones. Spring came with its first honest green. In May, a blowdown above Corbin Run sent a sycamore through the soil like a spoon and revealed a ledger of stones that had not seen light since Eisenhower. A student volunteer named Leda, working off a citation from a noisy night, found 2 marbles wedged into the roots where the ground had been a child's pocket. One was blue as the ridge on a clear day. One was green as a first leaf. They were bagged, labeled, cataloged. The ranger who filled out the form wrote found near the old stone spring house, Corbin Run, coordinates to follow. The park historian wrote a small note and signed it with a letter that looked like an A and a dot. Aislinn drove to Luray with the marbles and the whistle and a copy of the incident report with Martin Elwood's name on it. Tilda put her hand flat on the table again. She looked at the marbles and did not touch them. She touched the paper instead, the ink, the line that said, "Weather degenerating." She said Harlan's name until it stopped feeling like an apology. She picked up the whistle, finally, and put it to her ear as if listening to metal were a normal thing, and perhaps it is. Some evenings after that, if you drove Skyline Drive near mile marker 47 and rolled your window down, you could feel a warm breath slide into your car even when the air was sound and cool. It was not spooky, it was geology and a mistake and a memory. At the spring house, a ranger tied a ribbon to a low limb that matched the color of the marbles, bright enough to be seen and quiet enough to be ignored by anyone who did not need a reason to pause. The ribbon got replaced each year by whoever remembered. Martin Elwood's name found its way into the little museum at Big Meadows on a card next to an old lunch pail radio and a photo of the old Fox Hollow cinder pad with 4 ghostly post holes. Next to it, a thin slice of paper, a carbon copy of a letter whose original had been lost. The letter said, "Dear Mrs. Whitcomb, we are sorry we did not find your boy to bring him home. We did not stop looking until weather and hope told us to stop. He was last seen by the spring house that feeds Corbin Run. If you come to the park, a ranger will show you the stones." The letter was signed in a hand that did not know how to be neat and still be sincere. M. Elwood. Every now and then, on the radio, in the kind of weather that puts a lid on the hollows and makes the ridgelight a ghost, Aislinn would hear a wash of sound that reminded her of a man with a careful voice calling to his crew. She never keyed the mic until it faded. She let the air finish its sentence. She would step out of the truck and breathe the warm breath held in the cut. She would look toward the run that kept talking to the river under the leaves. She would say what she had learned to say when a story meets a place and refuses to end, just because the people in it have "thank you quietly" to the air. Then she would drive on, a little slower than before, as if a child were walking along the edge of her attention and she had decided to step back from the edge too. If you are listening from a place where the weather is steady, imagine a ridge crouched under a storm and a voice from a year you have to say out loud, not with numbers, but with breath. 1954. Hazel. Fox Hollow. A boy with a train's 3 notes in his mouth. A ranger with a lunch pail radio who pressed his fingers to his brow as if holding in his head all the ways a hill can keep a thing. Imagine the way a whistle feels in an old hand. Imagine the way a mother sits at a table and forgives a paper for being paper. Imagine the square of stones where water has no choice but to tell you where it is going. Then, tonight, when your own house makes its old noises and your clocks tame the hour into a number, let 1 minute expand for a voice that is not finished. Listen the whole time. Let the warm air pass across your face and do not name it. When it is done, say thank you and mean it. Then go to sleep. The hills will keep watch. The radios will behave until they do not, and even then, what they bring may be kinder than you fear. The 911 call that kept connecting after the funeral. They buried the phone with him because his mother asked them to. It had been his tool and his diary, the way people keep their whole lives in their pocket now. And in the week between the collision and the service, she said quietly at the kitchen table that she wanted him to have it. The funeral was on a brisk Thursday in late March in a small town along the Skagit River in Washington state, the kind of day that smells like thawed earth and rain on cedar. 2 days later, at 2:18 in the morning, the county's emergency line lit up with his number and the call connected as cleanly as if he were standing outside the dispatch center with a brand new signal. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Keely March was the dispatcher on the board that night. 36. A decade of night shifts wrapped around her bones like a habit she didn't try to quit. She knew the sound of every ringtone the county used, and 3 it no longer trusted. She had trained herself to keep breath even if a voice said there is a gun, or the faraway way people say, I think I'm dying. She kept a knitted cardigan on the back of her chair and 2 photos on the shelf above the console. Her mother standing in front of Diablo Lake with her hair trying to fly away, and a Polaroid of a skinny boy with a chipped front tooth and a smile that looked like a dare. The boy was her younger brother, Finn, 28 in the photo, forever 28 by the time the town paper ran his name above the fold. The collision had been a week before spring turned a corner. Late at a 4-way stop out by the county line, an empty log truck rolling too fast through a fog that made taillights smear into red ribbons. Finn drove a dented Civic with a cracked dashboard and an air freshener shaped like a salmon that had long since given up its scent. He worked night stocking feed at the co-op and mornings on his old guitar, composing pieces called things like Wet Pavement and The First Chanterelle. When the deputy knocked on Keely's door just after dawn that Friday, the word sister felt like a ladder that someone had kicked away. They buried him with the phone on a Tuesday afternoon because the ground needed a day after the last hard freeze. Keely held the thing in her palm before they closed the lid. Old, black, the screen spidered, and the case pocked with drops of white paint from the time they redid the kitchen. She turned it face down, as if giving it privacy inside that last small room, and she did not cry in that second. She saved the crying for the night in her car outside the Safeway lot when the radio played a song he used to send her links to, saying, "Listen to the way the kick drum makes the air behave." So when the board flashed with his number at 2:18 in the morning, when the screen read Finn March Mobile, when the console showed the tower on the hill by bird's view, grabbing his call like a father grabs a child's hand crossing a street, there was a half second where Keely didn't breathe at all. Then she did exactly what training says. She pressed the line open, put her voice in the place it knows, and said calmly, 911, what is your emergency? Silence, which is not always empty. The air bedded itself in her ear. She heard distance, a kind of wet rush the river makes when it is thinking about snowmelt. Under that, a click like someone setting a mug on tile. Her eyes went to the automatic location information and found nothing helpful. The software threw up a circle that could have been half the county. The handset beeped as if someone on the other end had put a thumb over the microphone and removed it. Then a sound arrived that she did not mistake, a short, soft, breathy laugh. The exact one a brother makes when he cannot help but find something funny, even in a room where the air belongs to grief. Keely's free hand had already found the little rosary of buttons around enter that she wore down with steady use. Her thumb wanted the panic of someone else. She kept it from that. She tried again. Can you talk to me? If you can't talk, tap once for yes, twice for no. If you are hurt, I need you to stay on the line. We are here with you. A small sound like wind through fur limbs rode the connection, then static, thin as a hair. The call timer hit 19 seconds, 21, 27. She probed the network with a key command. The number at the top of the screen did not lie, it was his. She sent a ping. The triangle on her map twitched half an inch and then flattened, embarrassed to have moved. The night supervisor, a stout woman named MrBall, who kept cough drops in a coffee mug painted with trout, wheeled her chair closer without rolling over Keely's headset cord. You good. It's his, Keely said, and felt foolish because the board already told them both. She tapped a line into the event note. Caller number displays as deceased subject. Open line, faint audio, possible misdeal from unknown handset, possible pocket dial from transferred number. Because the systems need this kind of vocabulary, even when the body wants to type a prayer. The line stayed. The river sound rose and fell with the patience of a thing that had been working since the first melt in these hills. Twice the click. At 42 seconds, a voice so faint that her headphones might have invented it if she hadn't known the exact way it shaped vowels. A whisper before the word, the way he did when he wanted to speak quietly but his breath didn't know the trick yet. Key, he said. Then static erased whatever came next. She did what you do. You keep the line alive and you start the search without pretending you can command the search's heart. She thumbed a hot button that rang the on-call deputy cruising past Lyman. She opened the text box to the Fire District volunteers and wrote a plain message. Open line 911 from cell belonging to Finn March. Please stage at South Skagit Highway and mile marker 12. Listen for any audible cues. She sent it. She kept her voice in that pocket where calm is a bridge other people can cross. If you can hear me, Finn, give me anything, tap, breath, song, whatever you want. I'm here. I've got you. At 1 minute and 9 seconds, the line disconnected itself with the flat little goodbye that handsets make when they are tired of holding grief. MrBall squeezed Keely's shoulder. Not hard, just where the muscle under the blade flinches when you ask it to admit it's a muscle. Phones glitch, she said. The way you say a thing because you care about the person you are saying it to, not because the sentence is enough. It might be a number that got reassigned too fast. Or a voicemail we don't understand, or the system hiccuping. Eat your granola bar, drink your water. Keely nodded. She typed. She called the carrier and reached a support tech whose voice was young and far away and trying very hard to be the right kind of helpful. He put her on hold while he consulted screens and a script. He came back with words that felt like pebbles. The phone was deactivated the day after the funeral. The SIM wasn't live. The number was in a 30-day limbo before being returned to the pool. No activity on the account, no pings, no nothings. He suggested, gently, that older consoles misreport. She thanked him with the flat politeness you give a person who has done their job thoroughly and still left you in the same room. At 3:31, the line lit again. Same number, same tower, same ring that used to show up when he called from outside the co-op in the rain. She connected. This time, the wind sound was larger, the way a body learns to be a room for weather. She said his name. She said her name, because sometimes that helps even with the living. The whisper arrived again, under a breath that made her think of the cold. Key, he said. Key. What key? Love. Tell me where you are. She could hear MrBall pinging the deputy, already turning him around toward the bridge at Minkler. She messaged the volunteer fire chief, a man named Boone, with a mustache that looked like the map of a meandering creek, and he replied with a thumbs up and the single word rolling because that is how nights with radios and riverbanks work. The whisper came a third time. Key, box. Then the line shook itself off like a dog and was gone. At dawn, she drove home the long way because the short way had too many pieces of memory stuck to it. She slept hard for 90 minutes and woke with the imprint of her headset still on her left ear. She showered and went to her mother's, sat at the table with the fruit bowl and the envelope full of sympathy cards that needed more than thanks in reply. She kept the thing she needed to say in her teeth while her mother talked about potato salad and what to do with the clothes in his room. Then she let it out. Simple. His number called, last night, twice. I answered. Her mother's hand did that small pat-pat that says, I hear the pain, but I do not believe the sentence. It's grief, she whispered. It changes the way machines sound. Keely nodded, because there was nothing else to do with that sentence but nod back and put it in a pocket for later. That night, Keely traded shifts so she could be back on at midnight, the board under her hands like a piano that belonged to the county. At 2:16, she said quietly to the room with no one in it but her, don't. And at 2:18, the line lit anyway. The event timer clicked into its 1 to 2 rhythm. She opened the call. The whisper came faster. Key, box, tread. She wrote the words down in block letters out of a reflex that felt like morality. She pushed her chair back an inch. Tread, she said, like stairs, like a step. A new sound crept in around the edge of the river. A hollow drum, regular, light. Keely closed her eyes. She knew that sound. Years of middle-of-the-night responses to houses with basements and water where it didn't belong. Sump pump, she said out loud, not to the caller, not to the room, just to the fact of sound. She typed, sump, pump, hum. Then another word arrived under the hum, not from the line, but from inside her own head, wearing the voice of the skinny boy in the Polaroid. Take the old key from the coffee can, sis, the one with the brass coin stuck to it. Box under the stair, third tread up, like we did when the lights went out in storms. She stood before she meant to. Maribel watched her, didn't stop her. Keely put the call on a hold that wasn't a hold and told Boone to swing a truck by her mother's house. She called her mother from the desk that sees everything. Don't be afraid, she said. I'm sending the volunteers to check the basement. Just wait for them. Don't go down alone. Her mother didn't ask why, which is one thing grief teaches. People you love get to make requests without explanation for a while. Boone's rig rolled up with its lights quiet. The volunteers went headfirst into that smell. Every Northwest basement owns bleach and wet and the memory of potatoes stored during years when the family didn't trust the store. Keely stayed on the line with the open nothing, her voice splinted into calm by a profession that forbids hysteria. The pump clicked. The whisper breathed once more and said a word she wasn't ready for. Sorry. Then, softly, don't be mad. Boone's voice arrived on the radio like a chair scraping back. Found it, he said, under the third tread. You want me to read you the note, or you want me to bring it to you? Read, she said, because whatever was going to happen to her lungs if she waited wasn't worth the poetry of paper in hand. Boone read slow, the way you read a recipe from a grandmother's hand. It's written on the back of a co-op receipt. It says, key tape to this in case. Safe deposit at Skagit State. There's a note inside for Key. Don't tell Mom what bank it is because she'll go without you. Tell her to wait. Also, okay, sorry about the dent in your bumper. That last part's got a smile face drawn like a potato. Something in Keely that had been standing on one leg for a week put its foot down. She let out a laugh that wasn't a laugh and wasn't anything else her mother would have recognized over the old landline if she'd been listening. She wrote the words down because the act made them legally alive. The line in her ear hissed a little, as if pleased. Then it went quiet. Morning brought a restless sun and the sort of legal tasks people think the dead should have trained us for. She drove her mother to the bank with the safe deposit vault and the ancient pen on a chain. She presented the letter that the funeral director had told her to keep in her purse. They signed a paper. They went into the room with the little booths. The banker slid the box out and put it down like a ceremony. Inside was a small green notebook with his handwriting, which had always leaned like a boy sitting cross-legged on a sidewalk. For Keely, it said on the first page. Next to it, a business envelope with her mother's name. There was a key on a ring shaped like a mountain that belonged to the old Subaru they used to share, and a folded paper that turned out to be a draft of a song he would never record because the bridge wouldn't come no matter how he tricked it. There was also a receipt for a storage unit in town that she'd asked him about once, and he'd shrugged and said tools while his eyes looked at a point behind her shoulder. He had written her a letter that began with 2 jokes whose laughter had expired, and then got to the part that made her lever open a whole new drawer in herself. I know you'll be the one who makes sense of this stuff if anything happens, he wrote. I know I'm not supposed to say if anything happens like I can see it, but I think about it when I'm out by mile 12 in fog and the log trucks don't think they need me to exist. He told her where to find things and how to say certain facts to their mother in a sequence that would hurt less. He wrote a sentence that came from the middle of his lungs: "Don't carry what isn't yours." He signed his name so fast, the last letter looked like a dog's tail. She held the little book while her mother read her envelope. Her mother's face did a new thing, an arrangement Keely hadn't known it could do. She realized, not for the first time, that grief makes a gallery of your expressions, and you have to decide which ones are worth hanging. That night, Keely took herself off the schedule, even though the county hates it when you do that with no notice. She made tea the way their grandmother did, steeped until the spoon stood up if you let it. She sat at the kitchen table with Finn's notebook and a pencil for the words she needed to lay next to his. She wrote the dates like you have to say them out loud, late March 2021, because numbers felt like bad company. She made a list because doing is a language the body trusts. At 2:18, the phone on the wall rang, the old landline they had kept for storms because cell service sulks here when the rain gets personal. She lifted it with the same hand she used to place IVs when she thought she'd be a nurse. She said hello the way you say hello into a hotel room when you think someone might be in the shower, polite and ready to apologize. "Open line," said the part of her that had trained for too long to rest, but it wasn't the emergency board. It was her mother's cousin from Bellingham, voice carrying prayer under its vowels. Keely felt the absurd laugh again and let it go this time. Not tonight, she thought to the air where a river sometimes lived. The calls went quiet for 3 nights after that. She dreamed the sump pump clonked in a steady heartbeat and that the water rose anyway, inching up the metal pole of the washer like it had a plan. She woke with her mouth dry and her eyes open, the way a serviceable person wakes when she has decided she will not let the day surprise her anymore. On the 4th night, the board lit at 1:10, not 2:18. Same number, same tower, same little pang like someone pulling 3 hairs from the back of her neck in the exact way a brother does when he wants you to feel a thing without associating the pain with him. She answered, now less afraid of the fact and more afraid of the day when the board would decide to stop being strange. This time, it wasn't the river. This time, a sound like tires on aggregate eased into her ear. She heard a blinker make an unnecessary music. She heard a rumble her body recognized as the mile-long freight that climbs the grade toward concrete and can be heard everywhere when clouds lay a lid over the valley. She said his name. The whisper didn't come. Instead, a voice she didn't know. Exhausted in that way dispatchers measure, with a ruler, not with pity. "Ma'am," the voice said, "are you the lady on the other end of this number? This thing called me and it went straight to your board." Keely did a fast thing with her hands that told the recorder to make a second copy. She said her name and her role. The man explained in the way tired men always do, with extra details they do not know are extra. He was a rail worker out past Birdsview, night shift, walking the line with a vest and a can of paint, and a patience that came from a man who had watched 3 friends leave town for no good reason. A phone lying by the ballast lit up bright white as a trout belly and slid a call to 911 before he could decide how to feel. He picked it up because of course he did. He saw the screen read Finn March because whoever the system was had a sense of humor. "Where exactly are you, sir?" she asked. And he told her the truth, the way only people at 2 in the morning tell you truths. Mile marker 11, point something, run outside of the line, by the old alder that looks like a witch if you give her a hat. She sent Boone with 2 men and headlamps and the desire to leave without needing to talk to anyone. They found the phone in a seam of gravel, half covered by ash from last summer's burn. No SIM, no battery, a thing not alive, and still somehow doing the work a thing does when asked correctly. The railman said he had watched a marten cross the tracks with the authority of a bishop, and that the phone had lit at his feet with no reason. Boone brought it back in an evidence bag, as if that would matter to anyone who keeps a room of labeled bags. Keely set the dead phone on the console like a votive. She stared at it 4 minutes and 40 seconds, and then turned it face down the way she had in the chapel with the roses and the smell of lilies that always go too far. She spoke into the radio to tell the volunteers to go home. She put a note in the event record that read in plain human, "Found object belonging to decedent, recovered at tracks near mile 11, turned over to family." The calls didn't stop. They thinned. They arrived on days when the river wore fog like a borrowed coat. They brought her directions she did not always want. It called once when she and her mother were at the storage unit with the overhead door that rolled like a prayer. "Box on the right," said the whisper after the open line, and the pump hum and the small laugh had passed. Not the one with Christmas lights, other right. The box held the watch their grandfather had worn in the war, and 2 rolls of quarters, and the letter that finished a fight their mother had been carrying with a girl from high school for 30 years without admitting it was heavy. It called once more on an evening in late July, the kind of hot, rare to that valley, when heat lies down like a dog everywhere and pants. She was off duty for once, drinking water in long draws with a slice of lime she did not deserve. The board would be in someone else's ear. Still, she felt it. The old wall phone rang, she lifted it. Nothing. Then the faintest corridor of sound, the way a tin can telephone sounds when the string is too long. She stood very still in her kitchen, in a house that still carries their father's shadow even after 2 decades, and she listened. No river, no pump. Someone whistled 3 notes she hadn't heard since they were kids on a porch with a bowl of cherries and sticky hands. The notes meant, "Come in, it's time." Then the line went as tenderly empty as it had ever been. People ask her sometimes when they find out what happens on the night board, whether she believes in ghosts. She says no in the way a person says no to a question that tries to make a movie out of a documentary. She believes in the way the valley holds sound and the way water teaches machines new tricks. She believes in the habits of grief, which include calling you at unreasonable hours and asking you to find objects on shelves you didn't label. She believes in the way certain names carry weight in certain counties and in the way good men hide keys in obvious places because they want the right person to find them without feeling tricked. If you listen for a moral here, you will miss the point and the point will not be angry. It will go on being a point without you. Keely goes to work, she works. She keeps the cardigan on her chair and the photos on the shelf. She answers calls from people who are alive in the cracked ways the living are alive, and she sends help, and sometimes the help is in time, and sometimes it is in time to witness the end of something. She eats her granola bar. She drinks her water. She drives home the long way if the short way tells a story too loudly. She keeps the dead phone in a drawer that sticks a little on humid days. She tells the story to exactly the right number of people and then stops. Some nights the board does the old trick and shows a number the carrier cannot account for, and a tower that should be asleep, and a location shaped like a shrug. She answers. She says the words she has said more than any words she will ever say. 911. What is your emergency? If all that comes back is a river being a river, she lets the line stay until it learns how to disconnect. If a whisper says key or box or sorry, she says the truth in the voice that has led more people back to themselves than the county will ever know. I've got you. We'll figure it out. When she passes the graveyard on her way to the early shift now and then, she rolls the window down and checks whether the air smells like cut grass and stone or like lilies someone should have watered more recently. She does not say his name out loud there because she knows better. She says it in the car when the freight rolls through the valley and makes the whole county feel like a chest resonating under a singer's hand. She says it in the basement when the pump kicks on and the house remembers last winter. She says it when her mother takes a nap in a chair with sunlight that has fallen asleep with her. And sometimes, when the hills fold the night just right and the board glows a color she cannot forget, the call connects after midnight and after the end of a song and after the last note of a life that learned to close drawers. It connects after the funeral and after the casseroles and after the number has technically stopped being anyone's. The call connects, and a river breathes, and a laugh leans into the wire, and a word that matters knows the way to the one person who will stand still long enough to hear it and then do something small and exact with what she has heard. That is enough. That is all anyone should demand from a story that features a phone and a county and a woman who is good at being awake when most of the world is asleep and at letting go when it is time to let the line go. So, if your phone rings with a number you are certain belongs to someone who has been given over to the ground, do not panic, do not make a shrine, do not go on television. Answer: stand still. Say your name, ask for what it wants. If the only answer is a sound you know, river, pump, train, the kitchen clock arguing with the refrigerator, write down the words anyway. They will lead you to a key you were meant to find, a box you were meant to open, a third tread meant to lift. And when the line empties itself politely, as lines do, put the phone back on its hook and walk the long way to bed. Somewhere far off, a dispatcher you will never meet is saying the same sentence you just said, in the tone that holds a county steady. I've got you. We will figure it out. Then, a light goes dark. The river keeps the beat, the valley sleeps, and doesn't, and goes on.